The NHL's newest expansion franchise in Seattle appears set to hire their first ever general manager in franchise history. We'll get into all the details coming up next. Welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. Now we have some breaking news this evening broke by NHL insider Elliotte Friedman that he posted here on Twitter, which I'll put up here on the screen. His tweet indicates that the Seattle franchise is set to be naming their first general manager, and it's going to be former Carolina Hurricanes general manager Ron Francis. Now, as he indicates here in the tweet, he can't get 100% confirmation from the franchise itself, but there's enough people around the NHL community that have sources that indicate this is indeed going to be the case, but an announcement might still be a couple of days away here before we get official word from the actual franchise here in Seattle. But obviously this is huge news. They certainly did not have to hire a GM this summer. They could have waited till the next NHL offseason or anytime really into the future, because there's still plenty of time before they have to get really fully prepared here to launch the franchise. But they did indicate before they would hire a GM this summer if they found the right candidate and were comfortable with who that person was going to be. Of course, Ron Francis had an awesome hockey career spanning over 22 years. He's fifth all-time in points right now. He's a Hockey Hall of Famer, four-time All-Star, Stanley Cup winner. Certainly had a really, really solid career, one of the greatest of all time. Became a general manager in Carolina back in 2014. He was there until last year when, after new ownership and Tom Dundon took over, that he relieved him of his duties, which was kind of handled kind of awkwardly, kind of weird. Originally he went to a different post and was later terminated, and of course we saw Don Waddell take over afterwards, who was already working in the organization in a different capacity. So obviously Ron Francis did do a good job at drafting. I will say that. We saw the Carolina Hurricanes miss the playoffs for a long stretch of time, but now this year they finally had some success, made the playoffs, and had a pretty deep run here, and we're not all that far off, from winning the Eastern Conference. So obviously a lot of that had to do with the work that Francis did before he was let go. Francis didn't have a terrible trading record, but he was certainly a little reluctant to sometimes make those big moves to really push the team forward. One of the black marks on his record as GM though in Carolina before he left though was the Scott Darling trade and contract given. Of course, they didn't give up a whole lot to obtain Darling from Chicago, but it immediately gave him that big contract before he ever played a game for them, before he ever had a chance to be a starter in the NHL. And of course that bombed miserably where he was recently traded and then bought out here earlier this offseason. That seems to be one of the things a lot of people reference Ron Francis to lately, just because that was one of the last bigger moves that he made as GM of the Hurricanes. But if you look back at the draft record here, like I said, over the 4 years that he was there, they certainly get a lot of great prospects that are now in the lineup or knocking on the door to be in the lineup here that have an impact on his franchise. This would be his second go at it as an NHL general manager. He's going to have more than enough time here to really prepare and decide for the expansion draft as well as their first entry draft, to do a lot of scouting and get his staff in place and all that. So plenty of time for sure. But of course, as always, love to hear your thoughts and opinions as Ron Francis, being the very first general manager ever in the new Seattle franchise's hockey history here. Certainly an interesting choice. They had been previously linked to guys like Kelly McCrimmon in Vegas, but of course he was promoted, given a raise, and certainly decided to stay put there, which wasn't a big surprise. And then of course they were also linked to Ken Holland. He was kind of in limbo after being promoted in Detroit. But of course, once that happened, we didn't expect that to happen too long, but he's been linked to the Seattle franchise for quite some time. But of course he ended up being the GM with the Edmonton Oilers. He didn't want to wait around so long, so he had an opportunity and he took it. Those were the two main names linked to this franchise before Francis's name has popped up here recently in the news as a potential candidate. So again, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section and we'll continue the conversation. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notification bell, and we'll keep you all up to date with all the news from around the NHL. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.